Sometimes it's very beneficial just to get back to the basics, to the fundamentals, so that we can understand a concept, and that's what we're going to do with autism, or with Asperger syndrome, which is sometimes referred to as high-functioning autism. So where does this word come from, autism? Well, it actually comes from two Greek words, which are autos, which means self, and ismos, which means just a state of being. So it means self-being. Now, the idea of autism, the concept of autism, is that people with autism are not selfish, but they are self-focused. That is to say, that they seem to be lost in themselves. And I think that is one of the reasons why people with autism are sometimes perceived by neurotypical people as being space aliens. I mean, this guy is a loner. He seems to be focused otherworldly somewhere else. I can remember when I was in my 20s, I had a job for a brief period of time, which was kind of typical. But the manager, which quite frankly was, what do you call people like this? Jerks. The manager was a jerk, and she happened to notice that my mind was somewhere else all the time. She didn't like me from day one, but that's beside the point. The point is that I had this self-absorption, which again was not selfish in a egotistical sense or a narcissistic sense, but self-reflective, or as we say, lost in oneself, lost in one's own thoughts. That basically is where the word autism comes from. So what is it? Well, it's a neurological condition. It's a brain condition. We could say it is biological or pathological. In other words, once you have autism, well, you're born that way. In fact, it seems that autism is something that develops prenatally before you're born. So it's something that you have for life. If you're autistic, you have always been autistic, and you always will be autistic. And it's not necessarily something that should be considered a disorder. That's an opinion. But it's something that should be considered different. For example, if you have red hair, that's different, but it's not a disorder. If you have blue eyes, that's different. You're in a minority of humans, but that's not, that's out of order. It's in the sense that it's not ordinary, but it is in order, and that it's really not a serious problem. Is it? Some people discriminate against people with red hair and blue eyes, I guess, but that's not their problem. It's the problem of the person who is doing the discriminating. I don't like this person. They have red hair and blue eyes. Well, it's not her fault or his fault, the person who has red hair, right? And the same thing applies to a person with autism. It's not their fault. That's the way they are. They're not attempting to be offensive. They're just self-reflecting. And if that bothers people, and by the way it does, that's not the problem of the autistic, is it? Well, hang on a second. Let's stop and think about a cat and a mouse. There's a cat in the room, and a mouse runs through, and what does the cat do? It chases the mouse. Who is to blame? Is it the mouse's fault for being a mouse, or is it the cat's fault for being a cat? You know, mice do what mice do. They are neurologically programmed, prenatally programmed, genetically pre-programmed, their DNA, to do what they do. And the same thing is true of a cat. So who is to blame? Well, the cat does what the cat does again, and the mouse does what the mouse does, and neurotypical people do what they do, and autistic people do what they do, because that's how we are hardwired. That is how we are genetically, again, pre-programmed. So it's really not so much a matter of fault, it's a matter of behavior. And what we have to do is understand that autistic people, they're just that way. And you can't, they're not broken. They don't need to be fixed. But what about neurotypical people, people who are not autistic? Are they broken? Do they need to be fixed? Some would say, no. I mean, does a cat need to be fixed because it chases mice? Who's to say? Who is to blame? So what we have to do, in my opinion, to understand the fundamentals of autism and Asperger syndrome, high-functioning autism, is to understand that the nature of it is that it's natural. That it's not a broken thing. It's not something that needs to be fixed. It is just the way we are. Now, say, well, let's educate neurotypical people. Well, good luck with that. I think it's a good idea, by the way, so that they will understand what they are dealing with, unlike the manager that I had to deal with when I was in my early 20s, which was not an isolated case by any means. But trying to educate 8 billion people, realizing that 100 years from now, nearly all of those people will be gone and dead and gone and replaced with other people who need to be educated, that is an insurmountable task. So what happens is that people with autism, like myself, simply recognize that we have this biological condition. This is our hardwiring, and we need to learn the best we can to adapt to a neurological world. Let's put it in this context. Let's talk about how it affects us. So we would say that we have social interaction deficits. How do you explain that? I explain it by thinking of two people who speak two different languages and they can't understand each other. So let's imagine that you find yourself born in a society that speaks Chinese. And you have this pathological condition. You have this prenatal, biological, neurological condition that does not allow you to speak Chinese. And for some reason, you can speak English. Okay, you got to use your imagination to understand this. But you were born in a society that speaks Chinese, which you cannot understand even if you wanted to, but you can understand English. And you notice that there are very few people around maybe that also speak English. And now what do? You're in a society with which you cannot fully communicate. So, okay, I'm going to go to school. But you can't understand anything. Well, you can understand a little bit because of, the teacher may write something on the chalkboard with chalk, obviously, and you kind of get the general idea, but this is not working. And out of school, you're in the workplace, same thing happens. You just, the manager, the jerk, what's wrong with this person? They seem to be so self-reflective, so self-absorbed. We need to get this person out of here because I just don't like him. Cat and mouse. Cat doesn't like the mice. So that's how it affects us. We have social interaction deficits, and that makes people with autism not only the focus of what we would call, discrimination, in that people like to eject us. They either want to get away from us or they want to get us away from them. But also it tends to make us very vulnerable because people misunderstand, misdiagnose, mislabel autism as being stupid or being incapable of understanding, which to some degree it is. Well, that makes us vulnerable to people taking advantage of us. And I can't tell you how many times I have been taken advantage of by people who just said, this guy is, he's really gullible. I got to say that I am gullible. I don't know if that's autism or some other reason, but this seems to be very typical. So we have this social conflict with neurotypical people. They don't want to be around us. They want to get rid of us, or they want to get away from us. That makes it virtually impossible to hold down a job because you cannot communicate with people who only speak Chinese and you only speak English, and it can't change. It just cannot change. We can try to understand each other, but it's very difficult. What's more, they just don't like us. So that is the way that we find ourselves. What's more, and this kind of compounds issues, but everyone with autism understands the problem with sensitivities. Could be sensitive to sound, could be sensitive to light. For example, the worst day of the year, in my opinion, is the 4th of July. Well, it's also the best day of the year. First of all, we celebrate American independence, and you can tell from my accent that I am American. By the way, can you tell from my accent what state I'm from? And if you guess Texas, you're wrong. When I go out and about traveling, people say, "Oh, you from Texas?" No. I have no idea. I was in Texas once for 3 days, and I did not pick up their accent. But I like their accent. I'm just not from Texas. But the point is that we are hypersensitive to certain sounds, certain conditions like lights. And personally, I have a problem with the 4th of July because of that, even though, I was married on the 4th of July. American independence is a day to celebrate. Yeah, I'm all for it. I just don't like the noise. I just don't like the fireworks. The only time I ever enjoyed fireworks was when I was in an airplane flying from, I don't know where, California, I think. And I think it was July the 3rd. And I looked out the window, and you could see all the fireworks from, 30,000 feet. I don't know how high we were. And it was a really amazing sight. Couldn't hear it. wasn't particularly bothersome. So yeah, at that time I enjoyed fireworks. But yeah, I like the 4th of July. I like the celebration. I like what it stands for. I just don't like the noise and the lights, typical of people with autism. The other thing I don't like that can help people understand autism is fabrics, skin sensitivities. The worst thing when I was a kid, okay, maybe not the worst thing, but one of the worst things that happened to me when I was a kid is my dad would cut my hair. And my dad was a barber in the Army, World War II. That's, he was also a cook. Those were his two basic responsibilities. And why pay for a barber? Dad is thinking, when I know how to cut hair, I'll cut his hair. Well, the problem that I had with haircuts wasn't the cutting of the hair, but was the residue. I mean, the little tiny hairs that would fall all over my shoulders, and it would become so irritating. Imagine wearing burlap with sand in it. That is kind of like what it felt like. Now, as a kid, I also hated taking baths, but I would always make an exception. Because after I got a haircut, first thing I wanted to do was get that hair off of me. Very irritating. So that's what it's like being autistic. That is how it affects us. Also, we have this thing with stimming, something that we mentioned earlier on. So I tend to rock back and forth. Some people flap their hands, some people chew on their hair. I don't do that because, well, it's not long enough. But a lot of times women will chew on their hair. I don't know why, but it's a form of self-stimulating. So we find ourselves in tense situations and we relieve the tension by self-stimming. Everybody does it. And I've used this example many times in past videos. But if you want to see an example of stimming, just go anywhere where there's a rocking chair and watch who is sitting in the rocking chair, and they start stimming. They start rocking back and forth. So I don't think of it as a rocking chair. I think of it as a stimming chair. Then there's also the matter of executive function. That is a part of the prefrontal cortex of our brain. And this is like the control center of our brain. So someone who does not have good executive function typically will be impulsive. They have trouble with impulse control. They have a problem with just adaptable thinking. They may have trouble planning. They may have trouble self-monitoring. People with autism typically have low executive function, I should say, which could include impulse control. But at the same time, people with autism tend to be highly organized. We love spreadsheets. We like things to be organized, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that's because naturally we're not. And so we use things like spreadsheets and to-do list as kind of like a crutch that helps us along. And we find those things very, very, very useful. So what is it? Do we have a deficit in orderly thinking, or are we too orderly? Well, it depends on how you look at it, but I do know this. People with autism tend to be hyper-focused. Once we zero in on a project, we're stuck. I mean, it's like drawing a line in front of a chicken. I've never actually tried this. I don't know if it works, but they say you can hypnotize a chicken in 2 seconds by drawing a line in front of them. Chances are you will never see me in a chicken yard. Is that what you call it? A chicken yard, a barnyard, whatever. Wherever you have chickens, you will probably never catch me in a chicken yard drawing lines in front of chickens just to see if it works. So I don't know if that's an urban legend or if it's actually a thing, but it is a good illustration of how people with autism sometimes get seriously focused on not just a project, but on a topic. So a person may be focused on, say, the Civil War, or they may be focused on some other event in history, or they may be focused on not just airplanes, but a certain type of airplanes. Or they may be focused on the subway system, but not on the subway system, but on the tickets, and not just on the tickets. I don't even know if they still have tickets or not, subway systems. But back when they did, it was not just that they would focus on the tickets, but a particular type of tickets. They would do this. They would focus, there were people who actually did that. They would focus on things, and that is typical of many people with autism, but not all. That's a good thing? Yeah, it could be. So if you need somebody who is a specialist, chances are that person is going to be autistic. Maybe not, but chances are they're going to be autistic because they are so focused on that specialty that they become experts. And if you need an expert, what you might want to do is check out some people who have autism. See those two boxes on the screen? You want to keep on talking? Let's do it. All you got to do is click on one of those two boxes, and the conversation's going to go on. If not, well, we want to thank you for stopping by, and see y'all next time.